So let's start off by telling us about AI Singapore. What is it? And then we can go down into AI for kids.
Sure. Thanks, Tara. Hello, everyone. AI is very important. It's here to say what AI Singapore primarily want to do in our multi-year mission is to be able to harness both the scientific and the economic impact of AI for Singapore. And to guide our work, actually, we are governed by three very simple principles. One, the first one is what kind of research should Singapore do for AI? With respect to the research institutions and the universities that we have built up. Number two, government ourselves is actually very interested to use AI, and we do want to be in the driver's seat. So how can AI significantly move the needle for our governmental work in terms of national level problem? That's the second thing we do. And the third one, which actually AI for kids is part of, is how do you build an AI savvy economy? An AI savvy economy doesn't mean organization or businesses. It has to go all the way down to working professionals, individuals, and even to our primary schools and elementary school kids. So these are the three guiding principles that we operate under. Yeah.
And why do you think it's important for like working professionals or everybody, even kids, to know and understand what AI is and how it works?
AI has become mainstream since early 2011, all that, and like any other technology, they are tools that can be used, that can be leveraged to improve your personal life, your professional life, and it is actually in everybody's interest to understand what the impact of these tools can deliver, and if they choose to do so, how can they skill themselves to be proficient and skilled users of such tools? And even if they are not in the position of, or they are not in the typical position of using those tools, it will be useful for them to understand how these tools are actually being used and how it actually impacts them. And
Yep.
it is this belief that we feel that learning about AI and AI literacy should not be on a particular group or particular age, or that it should be for everyone.
Yeah, and I think there's so much talk about AI
Mm.
algorithmic bias and how some of these algorithms are not being deployed safely and ethically. And
Mm.
I think it's only knowledge that helps you understand how nuanced the problem is, right? And you can't
I
suddenly
agree.
wake up and fully understand. It has to sort of layer on as
Mm.
you grow older or
Mm.
over a period of time. So shifting gears a little bit, I think 2020 was a crazy year for everybody, but I'm not sure how it
Mm.
was for Singapore because you guys lead in so much. So I'm curious, what was COVID like for Singapore?
Singapore in COVID basically has been a year of lockdown. In our parlance, it's called circuit breaker, because our minister that was in charge of looking at the COVID response, he himself is an engineer, and being engineer, the word circuit breaker, let's
I'm
let's
going to use
circuit
that.
break. Let's just, instead of talking about lockdown, let's just do a circuit breaker where everybody, just like the rest of the world, we follow the response of trying to do containment, right?
Hmm.
So everyone was at home, which is a very fresh, interesting experience. And I always use the word, paraphrase this word, this famous word from Winston Churchill: never let a good crisis go to waste. And you can see a lot of new businesses springing up, people actually rediscovering online. And I'll share you an interesting story. So I have friends in the government industries, and there's this particular government industries that purpose of work is actually to get seniors to embrace digital technology. And for years, they have been trying to get senior citizens to understand and scan QR code. Now, because of COVID, and because what we implement called Safe Entry, where everyone who goes anywhere are encouraged to scan a QR code to register their presence. Actually, my friend in the government agency find that because of COVID, every senior citizen understand what is the meaning of a
Yep.
QR code and how
Yeah.
to use it. So as you can see, there are of course negative impact, but there has been some positive impacts coming out of this whole
I
work
think
life.
same for us. Like we've been trying to do virtual mentoring since 2010, and corporations didn't want to do that, and now
Yeah,
everybody is open to this, right?
I agree.
Um, I was reading the paper that I think is about to be published about the impact of AI for kids in AI Singapore. I'm
Mm,
curious, what worked really well? Like, what were some key strategies that you used in AI for kids that helped really connect with kids better? And then also, I know that I really appreciated that you involved parents as teachers to teach this
mhm,
content.
mhm.
So, what were some of the barriers that you saw, especially last year during lockdown? Parents' willingness to be that role on top of everything. So, tell us
Mm.
more about the details of this.
Sure, sure. AI for Kids was actually designed before COVID happened. That was back in 2019. In 2018, the ideas was birthed, and in 2019, we did some prototype classes. And in fact, I'll do a shout out to Facebook Singapore, which was a primary sponsor of the pilot AI for Kids. Now, the premises for AI for Kids was that curriculum development in schools, the traditional approach tend to take multi-years. And both you and I know, and the audience, I'm sure you guys also agree that big AI being a very moving topic, the traditional way of doing curriculum will not be able to keep pace with the development of AI, especially ethics now being very important. So, so what we realize is that there's a better way to transmit AI to our elementary school kids, and actually the closest people that the kids always interact with are actually the parents, right? And the schools themselves also they have their own teaching load, all that. And in Singapore, we have this structure called the Parents Volunteer Group. Some parents actually would take a more active stance in helping out with the schools, and the school have most of the elementary school have a formal way of structuring the parents help, so they call it the Parents Volunteer Group.
I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
I think in the
Mm.
US it's like the parents teachers. No, there's a PTA, right?
Parents
Parent
Teacher
teachers.
Association.
Yeah. Oh, I
Ah,
think,
that's great.
or just I mean, but there is also a similar formalized structure. I
Sure.
know PTA is there, but I'm forgetting what the acronym is because I use it so
Oh,
often.
oh, so in PVG, we call it Parents Volunteer Group. These parents actually help out in terms of after school enrichment. And that's where we were zooming in. Uh, we know it will take a couple of years for AI to be a formal curriculum as we work our Ministry of Education to get that in. But we can't afford to wait that long. So instead of doing it as a formal curriculum, we want to do it as an enrichment.
Mm.
And the fastest way to do that is to galvanize people who are already closest to their kids and also these parent volunteers. So that was actually the thought behind this AI for kids, right? Now, if you talk about the challenges itself, I think primarily is even though we in the pre-COVID days, the parents themselves, they send the kids off to school, they had their own work to do. But because of COVID, uh, two things happen. One is everybody is always at home. And in the very early phases of COVID, where everybody is trying to adjust, um, there's a blurring of line between private and professional life. So parents actually have their neck full in terms of work
Yeah.
itself. So we do see some of the parents volunteer who may not be able to volunteer in schools, and they themselves also don't have much time to teach the kids themselves. So that's one of the primary things. But as time goes by, everyone shakes down to the new working environment, all that, and the kids themselves also actually experience the upheaval when
Adjust.
yes, when they have to come back to school and teacher have a fun time trying to adjust to Zoom as well. So it's it turns out to be a great thing because our materials are digital in the first place.
Mm.
So makes it easy to slot it in. So later on we do see more schools knowing that there's such a resource and then be able to do more things with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was our experience too. But we are looking at our website traffic and trying to understand some of these patterns. We have a platform called the Curiosity Machine where there are lots of hands-on design challenges.
I see.
And I think we had roughly like 800,000 sort of views pre-COVID,
Oh.
and that dropped in half during COVID. And I think it's because teachers used to use those design challenges in class, but it was harder to assign it as homework for parents, right? Because you have to
mm,
gather the materials. So just because something is online doesn't mean the traffic to that will increase. So these are things that we're trying to understand, how people change their behaviors, and how can
mm,
we,
mm,
what lies going ahead, right? Like
mm,
now, going into 2022.
mm.
So I'm curious. I don't have a full understanding, but like we were talking before we went live about the demographics of the different
Yes.
populations, income levels in Singapore. So tell
Mm.
us about underserved groups and who is underserved in Singapore.
Okay. Singapore, fortunately, in many ways, we have a very good governance structure so that most of the people do uh, every kid actually gets to go to schools, but there's undoubtedly sometimes there's some of the underserved or some of the families that have lower income. And the way I look at it, actually, this would be those people who have lost their job
Mm,
because of COVID disruption, right? And that's where they need to look at. So there will be parents who actually lost their job, lost their income, and these are the folks that actually need to spend time to recover to a new job.
mm,
So of course, subsequently, if you talk about the kids themselves still go to school, right? Uh, we have government agencies that we may work with to try to address that. Now, in our experience last year, we did not, AI Singapore did not work particularly with any underserved community. But on the flip side, actually, we were looking more of the citizens. Uh, I would say that they are the group that we also want to transmit AI for everyone to
which
them.
citizens?
The senior
Yeah,
citizens
senior.
to us will be 65 years and above,
Mm,
right? So one of the things for AI for kids, what we try to do is to encourage intergenerational learning too.
mm,
So it can be repurposed as such. So we do want to see that while we teach the parent volunteers to learn about AI for kids and teach to their own kids, the grandparents themselves can also be enrolled into this program, and we can also teach them as well so that
human
both the
potential.
grandparents, yeah. So this program actually can be open to tackle this underserved market too. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I think as I was saying, grandparents have always been a big part of our ecosystem, and we've seen that when we used to have family programs, the grandparents would bring the kids to the family programs, and
Yeah.
then they realized that actually it's fun to learn about all these new technologies, and it's not so scary, and it's a
Mm,
way to have a common shared experience with their grandkid. And I think we ran a large survey a couple of years ago to try to understand what would be some motivations for seniors to learn about AI. And I think
mm.
the number one piece was, I want to be able to connect with my grandkid because I
Grandchild, yes.
see them on these devices. I want to understand how these devices work,
Hmm.
and be able to share that platform, right? Like
Agree. Yeah.
so humans are the human connection is the strongest driving factor there. Um,
Agree. Mm,
I've been going through the AI Singapore content, and I think we are excited to use some of those videos in our curriculum and our
mm,
season going forward. But I'm also, in our work, we've found like the deepest learning comes from when you apply concepts to a problem, a real world problem. And is this something that you're thinking about? And what does success look like for you along this trajectory?
Constantly. Tara, you hit on a very important point. When it comes to classroom theory, or that, there's only so much you can do.
Mm,
You may demonstrate skills, but you may demonstrate understanding of theory. But the very important thing, and is also one of the key mandate for AI Singapore when it comes to getting everyone to adopt AI. For the students that are just before graduation, they are going to enter into the workforce. It's very important that they get every opportunities to work on real life projects, especially industry projects, so that when they graduate, they can actually immediately contribute to employees, and it actually makes them more hireable. Singapore being very pragmatic is all about how do we get our students to be hireable when they graduate. So when it comes to helping them to apply, that is where the schools try to incorporate capstone projects, mini capstone projects for every single course that you have. So when we try to build our course, there's always quizzes behind. The more advanced courses itself actually then will look at real world examples. AI Singapore actually produced a series of pre-built AI models that simulate real world working problems. In fact, we work very regularly with all the different companies, and if it's a very, very common problem that is faced by a lot of companies, we actually develop the AI model and open source it out. So by open sourcing out, it means that everyone can take to use it. I mean, everybody in the audience are free to come and welcome to explore AI Singapore website for all these open source AI models. Now, the AI models then themselves can be incorporated into the course, is incorporated with our schools who are constructing some of the learning programs too. So that's one way for us to extrapolate all the work that we've done within the organization to as many people as possible. Yeah.
I think COVID has had us focus on a lot of things that we weren't thinking about, right? And so there's a lot of discussion around learning loss and helping students build skills that they may not have gathered because they weren't attending in-person school or even any kind of school. And so I think there's a lot of emphasis on basic skills, and sort of strengthening those. How would you sort of motivate education organizations to think about AI? And because over the next, like if you're planning your strategy for the next years or so and thinking about, well, we need to acknowledge the losses coming out of COVID, or it's not all just losses, but the change, right? So our education strategy cannot be what we said earlier. It has to adapt to what the current situation is. How do we bring in AI into this? Because I feel that most education organizations outside of Singapore are going to say that this is not the most important thing to be thinking about. So what would be your pitch to them?
Okay. I think that I'm sure there are problems that have higher priorities for them. Then it should not be an excuse not then to expose your future generation to these technologies that by the time they go into the workforce is most certainly going to be a very commonplace thing to have. So do not unnecessarily disadvantage themselves. I think AI Singapore can work with organization, can work with Tara, yourself, your organization, and everybody to come together to build a global database of AI literacy programs, which any nation, any organization that is also serving big underserved market or disprivileged group to be able to access. And I think collectively between all of us, what I would love to do as a personal achievement is we contribute together a foundational course for different levels, for different ages that all of us agree to. And with this foundational course, we get all of our future generations and our kids, right, to understand the basic language of AI, the terminologies, all that, get all of them to be at least demystify what AI is. And I think that's one very important thing. We do not necessarily need to wait for formal curriculum to come out. Every one of us has been doing different work. We just need to come together and agree on these foundational standards for different levels. And at least everybody can start contributing and working on it. And that become a living template. Yeah.
I agree. And I think I like your approach where like the teachers in the formal school system is overburdened and we don't all have to wait for the formal education standards to be adopted, but working with parents and grandparents. I mean, really, it's a community-based approach. I think that's the way you sort of strengthen all communities, right? Because it's not just about the children. Okay, so wrapping up towards the end, I'm curious, what is one book we should read to be better human beings? And I know we had this discussion before, and I would say anything that uplifts you, that because that's part of your overall well-being, right? Like we
Yeah.
so there's no category here that is the right or the wrong category.
That's a very difficult question because I read fiction book uh, because in my off work time I do not want to read another technology book again. If you talk about the one book that I want to read, I'm afraid I don't have one to recommend to you. What about you? What is the one book that you have been reading?
um I I I have been learning so much from all the people who come each week,
Mm.
and each time. So I'm always usually one book behind because I'm reading the book that the last person recommended, and then a new recommendation comes, and then I start to read that.
Correct.
So I think I am reading. I'm reading two books. I'm reading one on gardening. It's really fun. It's called Green Thoughts. But then I'm also reading a book called Seeing Race Again.
Oh,
It's sort
okay.
of the
Cool.
intersectional. The term intersectional came from this book. I think I forget the researcher's name, but anyway, I think fiction to me is very very um, fiction is based on humans, so it helps you look at our connections even in a different light. So I don't have anything against fiction, so I'd be curious, what is a fiction book you're reading now?
Fiction book I'm reading right now is Isaac Asimov. I'm reading back all the old books, and then I'm also reading. So as you talk about robotics, I'm reading up the three laws of robotics, from Isaac Asimov. All that. So
I
these
haven't
are
read that one.
just the stuff that keeps me interesting. Yeah.
I think one of the fiction books that I series that I read and I could not put down was
Mm.
Shijin Lu's
Oh
trilogy. Have you read that?
no, I'm afraid not.
Oh,
No.
well, that one is something, just a trilogy. Um, Three Body Problem, and
Okay.
have you heard about it?
No. Let's give me the book title after that. I'll
Oh
add
my
it to the
goodness.
list
Okay, this
again.
one is so, like, you've got to drop everything and read this book. You will.
Okay.
um, there are three or four series. He's a Chinese author. I had to
Oh,
read the translation. I can't
translation.
imagine
Yeah.
how good the original would be, but
Okay.
yeah, it's a absolutely
Mm,
top.
mm.
Okay.
Okay.
Last question. What should we be working on with intention this year?
If I take a pick, it would be AI ethics
Hmm.
and governance. Uh, AI Singapore has been trying to promote the adoption of AI, and with some success, more and more companies, individual businesses, they upskill themselves. They are able to put um, AI or machine learning into their business processes. But I think it's also very important for them to understand what automations that can be enabled by AI, what kind of ramifications that can be brought about. I think beside uh, beside developing courses that teaches about AI and how to use AI, we want to focus more on AI ethics, thinking about developing models for those in the technical fields, developing model fairly, responsibly, ethically. I think that's very important. And for those who are not directly developing AI models, I think it's also very important for us to understand and recognize what are biased AI solutions that is coming up, or what are biased business model that seems to discriminate against different group, and be able to lend our public voices out there that there are certain systems that we will not accept.
Hmm.
We need to collectively start building up a public trust, as well as our own public perception of what are biased models and what are unbiased AI solution. And that to me, I think is very important. And AI Singapore is actually also looking at ways which we can audit
Hmm.
a AI solution before it goes into a deployment stage. So this is what I think we should be working on.
Yeah, and I think in conversation with so many people who, I mean, educators as well, one person told me something. Is like ethics is not anything new. It's just been repurposed. The term is human rights, and I thought that was so interesting. And so it's like, look up the UN article, Declaration of Human Rights, and so I started to go through all the articles, and I think it's just something that normal people, and especially not engineers, are ever taught about this, right? But the UN came out of the reason for the world to protect humanity and to not repeat atrocities. And so the Human Rights Declaration have embodied a lot of these things, like protect this group, this group, this group, in this way. So I think that's something that children are not, and colleges that don't teach, and AI is just one part of it, right? So anyway, I would wholeheartedly agree with you.
I think that's very interesting, and thank you for helping me to understand that. If I mentioned to you earlier about the Isaac Asimov three laws of robotics,
Mm,
the three laws of robotics were: number one, a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm.
mm,
Second law was a robot must obey the orders given by human beings, except if such
mm,
orders conflict with the first law, so on and so forth. If you look at it, you replace the word robots with AI,
mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm.
if I put in your word human rights, is basically that root of what
Yep,
ethics is all about.
yep, yep.
I think this actually will form these basic principles that we should understand. Thanks
Yeah,
for sharing this
and teach, right?
and teach
I
that.
think we talk about fairness and bullying to younger, to schools, but I think maybe there's time and place, because when technology is in the hands of everybody, you have the power to use these tools. Earlier we did not have that, and so I
Yep.
think this education needs to be made more mainstream. Anyway,
Mm.
Sengman, this was absolutely fabulous and a treat
Thank you.
to chat with you, so thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Thank you.
And yeah, I look forward to continuing the work and the discussion and the global database of AI curricula and courses for humanity, right? Maybe that's our next to do.
Our
All
next
right.
video.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.